I'm going to be talking tonight on the intertidal archaeology of coastal Uist. Just one or 2 points before we start. About 33,000 years ago, we had some fairly bad weather. Things got quite cold here, and that lasted for about 23,000 years. So an awful lot of the original early man-made sites were completely lost. So we're not going to cover those tonight at all. It's purely speculative what might have been here. So we'll stick to things that we know about, and they're equally interesting though. I hope you'll enjoy the show. We do have an apology for a start. I think you're all familiar with the Scape Trust and with the Sharp project. I got some new data, and apparently Scape have nearly 3,000 listed coastal sites on Uist. We're going to shorten it down a bit, and I'll just be covering a limited sample of coastal sites, and they're going to be ones really that I've had at least some direct association with. So tonight's talk will cover a general overview of the timeline. We'll look at the intertidal peat deposits. They seem to be a particular specialty of Uist. There are about a dozen sites up and down the coast. They have lots of associated artefacts and remains, and we'll go on then to other coastal features, some of the other industrial archaeology of Kelping, and finally just a summary slide. So our post-glacial timeline, glaciation ended between 10 and 8,000 years BC, leaving just a stripped section of rock in the Atlantic. First human interventions from about 7,500 BC, we get a few Mesolithic remains being found, mainly flints and that sort of thing. There may have been intermittent settlement, but it was mainly just short visits, we think. Neolithic came along, and we started to see more permanent settlements, the beginning of farming, and the usual large stone structures, circles, barps, huts. Gave way to the Bronze Age with the kiss cairns, more settlement areas. We're starting at this point to also see some of the artificial islands being built up on some of the lochs. So we're getting Crannog Formation, and that's being investigated at the moment, the Uist side of that. So the Iron Age was a boom time. Population was probably a lot higher than it is now, and some of the estimates have put the Uist population, or the Southern Isles population, as high as 20,000, which is probably stretching it. But there was a lot of activity, a lot of people here. If anyone ever asks you the question, what do the Romans ever do for you? Well, on Uist, the answer is really not a lot. They never got here. We had really the Norse incursion and settlement, which I suppose acted as our interface between the Iron Age and the medieval. So our Norse period began with just incursions at about 600. There was formalized rule from there in 1098, and then that just petered out with the Treaty of Perth, 1266. Medieval period, well, 1745 is a convenient date to remember. It was a date of great changes, and particularly of note for the Western Isles, with the Bonnie Prince Charlie coming into Eriskay. And then beyond that, we're into the modern period and the evolution of Uist society. So just a final note here. UCAC members have put up about 350 new sharp sites since 2014, and we're continuing to monitor many of the most risk sites on an annual basis. A little bit of word about the glaciation. Let's say the skeletal base of Lewis is Lewisian gneiss on Uist. It's some of the oldest rock in the world, about 3 billion years old. The early suggestions about the Ice Age, really it's a sort of a colonial map. Everything coming out from the centre of Britain, and it became a lot more nuanced in the last century, towards the end of it, and they now realise that it's in fact a separate Hebridean ice zone, much thinner. The mainland was on anything up to 2 kilometres of ice. We had about half a kilometre, which was good because it didn't compress the islands down into the continental shelf. You also notice the direction of flow of the ice was into the Minch, so it's a reverse of the original simplistic model. So because there was lower pressure of ice, the islands were not pushed down and we're not bouncing back up. In fact, the weight of the Lewisian gneiss is causing the islands to sink. So after the Ice Age, Uist was a lot wider, up to 14 kilometres further out into the Atlantic than it projects today. The Atlantic wore away here, and at the moment we're sinking by about 1 metre per millennium. And about 6,000 years ago there was a disruption of some fossilized shell deposits in the Atlantic, and the Maca sand was then started to be brought in by the Atlantic, and then was wind blown across the western seaboard, producing the Maca. As we've continued to sink, and as the Atlantic has eroded the edges, so the shape of Uist has continued to change. More and more of these locks have gone, and now we're left with the outline that we know today. So we've got wind-blown sand over peat here, and the older Lewisian gneiss skeleton with, again, a lot of peat deposits on the eastern side. So the earliest deposits we have are related to peat deposits, and these are all areas which in the past were associated with freshwater lochs and marshes. And at all of these little grey sites here, there are greater or lesser amounts of peat building up against there. They now show up as intertidal peat. And one thing to remember with Uist is that most of our western coastal sites didn't start out as being coastal. They've only become coastal due to the sinking of Uist and the incursion of the Atlantic. So the forest remnants we find in these deposits gives our earliest carbon-14 dates, and and some of the early peat deposits, the lowest layers of those are giving dates back to around 7,500 BC. Also, there are anthropogenic deposits in the peat. We've had exciting things like Bronze Age baskets, butchered bones, quartz blades. Quartz blades were far more common than flints here. We had no flint deposits, and very little flint was in beach pebbles here. There was no great source for them at all for to bring that in. So any flint we do find has almost certainly been imported by incoming tribes or by incomers who were trading with the indigenous people. So if we look at some of our peat deposits and then have a look at one or two of these that we've been investigating over the last few years. And the first one we're going to look at is the Bronze Age basket, which Roger Auger found in 2014. This turned up as this enigmatic oval shape, and when it was just looked into, you can see the edge of the basket along here, and a selection of quartz pebbles. I think there was some ceramic material, some quartz flakes, bone flakes, and that was looked at by AOC. I don't think we got any final carbon-14 dates from that. The next one is up in the north end of the area. This is the south coast of Berneray, and Roger and David here discovered this deposit eroding on the beach, and there were a considerable number of large pieces of tree. So we had in 2016 the escape team came over, and Scott Timpany there just with his head towards us, and so they were taking samples to identify the wood. Some bits of wood are easier to identify than others. Nice hazelnut there. These other pieces, there's a piece in there which look remarkably like willow, with that familiar red colour that we have become used to over time. This was a section that was taken through the peat deposit, and it takes it from a freshwater pond down here with rushes, microscopic charcoal. This is about 4,500 calculated BC. This coincides with other deposits of charcoal and is thought to be due to burning of some of the native woodland. We've got various layers of blown sand intermittent with fresh deposits of further bits of peat here, and by this stage up here we're getting to really a more firm ground. Trees were able to grow here. It would have still been probably fairly soft ground on the edge of the fresh water. So we move down to Benbecula, to Linnaclet, and this was Anne Monk identified this in 2014. Happy birthday, Anne. And after the 2016 visit, I went round to plot the edges of the peat deposit, and it is very extensive indeed. This was done with georeference photographs. The only reason I couldn't go further down this way was that that was the lowest level the tide got to when I was doing the survey. But you can see on the satellite, the topography is much the same right the way down here. And if you go to the north coast of South Uist, just opposite the site here, there are peat deposits there that appear to be identical. So it is likely that the whole of the area between Benbecula and South Uist was once occupied by a large loch and an area of peaty wetland with lots of trees. There was a team came in from Scape again in 2018, and some of these tree deposits here are really quite large, anything up to a foot in diameter, the trunks of these, and they were identified as mainly willows, quite a lot of birch, and I think there was one Scots pine, surprisingly enough. And there was also an area where there'd been bone deposits here and quartz flakes, and this turned out to be a site of butchery. Some 20 quartz flakes were found, and some of them you could see had been repeatedly struck from the same original quartz source. The bone appeared to all come from the same animal. It was all from a calf, and it was carbon-14 dated to 3,500 years ago. So a nice bit of discovery. And this was a saddle quern that was found on the beach there, just next to some remains which we believe to be the remains of a settlement village on the site, which goes back again to Bronze Age. So the map that was produced, the green rectangle down here is 30 meters by 60. Over 300 samples of tree specimens were taken from there for identification, and for some of them we use for carbon-14 testing. The main butchery site was up here, and the quern site is across over here. The settlement area in this area, and the site is still under observation, and this was a recent discovery of Anne's. It's a large cow's scapula, and judging by its depth within the peat section here, it's much deeper than the butchery site was, so it's likely to be very early Bronze Age, or possibly going back to the Neolithic. The earliest carbon-14 samples we got for the sites here, the lowest levels were 7,500 BC. The trees were from about 4,500 up to 3,500, and the butchery site was about 3,500. So visit 2 years ago, we were looking at some of the sites, and there was one nice additional new find, and that was this saddle quern. It appears to have been purposely broken, which was not unusual at all, and it possibly represents a sort of a decommissioning ritual practice to break the querns and put them into decommissioned buildings. Kildonan is another of our peat sites. I've been keeping an eye on it, and it's turned up teeth, turned up bone fragments, there've been pottery sections, lots of shell midden material, and it's different every time that the site is visited. Sometimes there are going to be more quartz flakes, sometimes there may be very little at all. And then in 2020 there was some new bone fragments, but there was one complete bone. It turned out to be a cow's metatarsal. From the X-ray analysis of it, it was an adult beast. From the size of it, it was obviously a much smaller one than we're used to seeing today, and it is in keeping with other Bronze Age cattle skeletons that have been found throughout Europe. We didn't have it carbon-14 tested, but that is always a possibility for somebody to do in the future, should they wish. So one site that we've been hunting for has been down at the south end at Smerklet. The site was recorded in 2008, but we've never been able to find it. And all of a sudden, last year, it finally came to light again. It was Danny who found it, and he was looking down there after some of our southeasterly gales that we had last winter, and the large piece of tree just on the surface, just held into the peat below the sand here. The site, when we measured it, is more than twice the size of the originally reported site, and it's suspected that the site is probably a lot further, and perhaps by going and doing some further survey work and using a coring auger, we might be able to get a better idea of the extent of the site. But it probably goes underneath the dune system down there, and maybe as far as some of the local lochs. So if we look at some of the settlement features, this is a new site which came to light on Queen's Beach, and I suppose strictly speaking it's not intertidal, they're usually above the tide, and nice midden lens there, and there are shells, there's ceramic material, ashes, carbon fragments, a typical sort of Iron Age midden deposit, and a very nice section of wall. Again, this is just really came to light last year. There's been quite a lot of wind erosion to this particular area. It's very close to some other Iron Age finds, but also close to a medieval township. I'm not sure what lives in the hole there. This is on Berneret, and at least in theory, Berneret has no rabbits. So it's possible that it's an otter, or possibly fairies. Who knows? So, see, one of the typical things for an intertidal feature would be wrecks. We have our fair share of them. We'll look at one or two of them. The earliest ones we have from the 16th century. This is down at Ardavaca. This is a bit late. This is Roger's picture. This is at Balashare Beach. It's the photograph that he posted in Canmore. So that's a 19th century. Most of the wrecks that we still have around are the last 100 years or so. Sadly, this fishing vessel is now completely gone. It was broken up when some work was being done on the shoreline here by the Crofter. And this is the lifeboat, the Andorra Star. It's a bit like the Marie Celeste. It's there 1 month and then it disappears for several months and then reappears again. It's very much the vagaries of the way the sand is being redistributed by the tides and the currents. Kelping was a massive influence on the Western Isles. It was a massive influence on Scotland, and it's really the kelping industry which was the cause of the first statistical account of Scotland. So, but it was also a massive income for the Western Isles estates. So to have a kelping site, you need several features. Most obvious one is cleared beaches, little harbours, little nausts for boats to access. The area is cleared off so lots of boats could come in, deposit their tangle, and then head out and go and cut more. You'd have walls to retain the tangle. These are situated right at the top of the beach, at the top of the tide. The tangle will be put behind the wall, and the seawater in there could drain out for a day or two before it was then spread onto the ground above to dry out before it was burned. Very often these areas where the tangle spread are now very heavily overgrown with bracken. It's probably because of the damage to the soils with the weight of tangle over there. Then tangle would be burned in a kiln. Very often these were chiseled into bedrock, and the material will be burned slowly over 24 hours or so. It's about 20 tons of tangle burns down to produce 1 ton of kelp. Kelp is the industrial material. It's a soda ash, and was used as well, after further processing, was used as a chemical component for the glass industry and cosmetics industry. So on larger sites or sites which were away from townships, you'd often have bothies, very similar to those that you would find on the Sheelings, similar size and similar building construction methods. This one is on Lingay, and tangle is still collected. This is one of the local crofters putting a few tons together. Nowadays they go for specialist food supplements for cattle, but more recently they've been sending some of these supplements over to the Middle East for racing camels, apparently, which struck me as a rather strange way that you could use seaweed, but there you go. So the kelping is the biggest single contributor to estate wealth in the 18th and 19th century. It continued right up to the 20th century. It was still supplying Pilkingtons in Lancashire with kelp in the 1910s. So the estate ran large Kelping centres, and this was one of 24 purpose-built bothies that were put together in 1878 by Lady Cathcart, and by having the families all in this large production unit meant they had the economies of scale to still be able to get some sort of profitability long after most of Scotland had stopped producing any kelp. So other estate centres were at Bay Morag, and recently I've been looking at the sites around Nahelan, Portfedder, Peters Port. There are 3 islands there, and there are kelping sites across the 3 islands with a whole sequence of bothies, and it looks to be a major kelp production centre. But nothing has been done about it, and it may very well be that we'll be getting some survey work going in that area once we get past the lockdown measures. So the installations were able to generate profit because of economies of scale, and really because they were taking on the sort of labour relationship that the estate owners were used to from their colonial past, and they could just keep it running and getting some profit from it. You sometimes find a kelping area on focused on a single farmstead. This at Knock Queen, and you can see the beach has been cleared. You've got various walls. You've got quay sides built up in stone. You've got areas over here for the burning of the kelp, the kelp kilns, and you've got a couple of deep nausts built way up in the field here. These would have been probably for putting the boats, overwintering the boats, so they would be kept safe. So this particular site has been occupied for between 2 and 3 centuries. You've got the early aspects up here. You've got a later 19th century farmstead and byre, various enclosures, and this is the beach area, which you can see in the photo there. Another feature important for Uist were just well, boats themselves. There were no roads on Uist, or no significant numbers of roads, until the 20th century. Most of the transportation was by boat. More families lived on the east side than the west at this stage, and a lot of families would have boats. A lot of townships would keep several boats for their township's use, and you would have a naust that would be cleared of rocks for able to bring a boat safely into here. The access would be never in line with where the boat would be stored, so that it acted as a sea brake to stop the boat being damaged in rough weather. And above the north here, for winter and for severe storms, you could pull the boat up onto this grassy area even higher and get it completely out of the water. On a larger scale, on a more of a community scale, you would have piers and jetties. Obviously the north was very much just the individual boat, but the investment in piers and jetties was large. That was a community asset. This is on Loch Skipport, and originally this whole area within here would have been cleared of all boulders, which were then piled up on the outer edge there to act as a seawall. Slowly this is being eroded away by storms and being deposited back in what had been the safe harbour. This was a quayside. This original quayside here is solid bedrock. It's later been added to with another layer of about 1/2 metre of boulders and a footpath across. If we go back 1,000 years, remembering that Uist is sinking, so it would have been about 1 metre higher, this area would have given a quayside in deep water with dry feet. Because it's now sunk down, it's had to be bolstered up with the addition of the boulders here. So this is a natural feature which has been initially used and then kept in use by the addition of further boulders later on. So another of Lady Cathcart's investments, the pier at Loch Skipport. The idea was that it would be making money from the herring industry. Unfortunately, she was about a decade too late to get any real return from the herring, and the Dunvegan to Loch Skipport route, which was hoping to become important, was quickly overrun and overtaken by the Loch Boisdale to originally to Oban as a more direct route to get down to the Glasgow industry centres. Some of the early piers are still in use and have been upgraded just to maintain functionality, and this one's down at North Loch Einocht, where this new top has been put on, and this pier is still in certainly weekly use for landing fish. So the dimensions of some of the jetties and piers, this is out at Scarrow Lodge on Loch Uist, and this one is at North Loch Einocht. The harbour here, this is a single bedrock slab about 6 meters high, and then you've got this large wall that's been built down on the eastern side. This is about 60 meters in length, and the pier here at Scarrow Lodge is about 15 meters wide and again about 60 meters in length. Huge investments in manpower to build such infrastructure, and all being built by hand at this stage. So one thing that has come to light in the final years of the first Scottish Parliament, an act was passed requiring that inns were to be built at all ports to encourage commerce throughout Scotland, and these were called taishinse, literally a change house, and it was for a change of horses to help you on your journey. And this is again, this is the western port at Loch Erenban on Loch Einocht, and this is the taishinse that was built for that. Just to the bottom edge here, there's a secondary building which would have been a stable for the horses. So in summary then, Uist has a large variety of coastal sites, and coastal sites have produced some of the oldest carbon-14 materials found on Uist. But it must be remembered most of our western coast sites were not planned as being coastal. They've been eroded and become coastal by the sinking of the island and the action of the Atlantic. Most of the early settlement was on the east because water was the main transport. Roads and causeways really only came into being in the 20th century. And because of our sinking geology, this is exacerbating the threats from rising sea levels. So because of this, the recording of sites is imperative. Very few can be preserved. We don't live in museums, and I don't think we really want to. The changes add that extra frisson to what you might find on a walk along the beach or along the shoreline on the eastern side. So there we are. Most of these sorts of presentations end up with a sunset. This is actually a dawn at Loch Skipper, and hopefully this is going to be a dawning with more collaborative works between UCAG and the ACFA group, and hopefully you'll all be across here as soon as we can arrange things safely.